My grandmother used to say the holler takes care of its own. I didn't know what that meant when I was a kid, and she'd say it. I figured it was just the kind of thing old women in eastern Kentucky say when they're trying to sound wise. Like how people say, everything happens for a reason, when there isn't a reason and they just don't want to sit with that. But that's where I'd start if someone asked me to explain Bellow Fork. The holler takes care of its own. I just didn't understand, back then, what the holler considered its own, or how it went about taking care of things. I got to Bellow Fork the last week of May. I want to say something more interesting about my situation, some version of it that makes me sound like I made a decision instead of getting backed into a corner. But the honest answer is that I'd been a charge nurse at a hospital in Louisville for 11 years, and when they restructured the unit in March, my position was one of the ones that got eliminated. That's the word they use, eliminated, like a bracket in a tournament, like you were a team that simply lost. Anyway, I had 3 months of severance, 2 credit cards that were embarrassingly full, and student loans that were not going to care about any of this. My apartment lease was up in April. I hadn't renewed it because I'd been going month to month for 2 years thinking I'd figure something out. And then March happened, and I had not, in fact, figured anything out. My grandmother died in February, heart failure. She was 83, and she used to say she didn't trust anything that stopped being a fight. She wanted to go the way she'd lived. Loudly, and then, suddenly, she left me her house. It was not a gift I'd expected. I have cousins, plural, several, who were closer to her geographically and emotionally, and in every practical way. But there it was in the paperwork, the house, and about a 1/4 acre of property in Bellow Fork, Knox County, Kentucky, left to me specifically. My cousin Sandra said, "She always said you were the one who'd know what to do with it." I did not know what to do with it. I knew I needed somewhere to sleep that wasn't a credit card bill, and the house had heat and running water, according to the estate lawyer. So I loaded my car in April and drove south and east until Louisville became smaller counties, and smaller counties became 2-lane roads, and 2-lane roads became the thing that is Bellow Fork. Population somewhere around 900, tucked into a bend in Raven Creek, which runs brown and shallow in summer and floods its banks every March like it's paying rent. Surrounded on 3 sides by dense Kentucky forest. Not the romantic rolling hills kind you see on bourbon labels. The real kind, the old kind, oak and hickory and tulip poplar that have been there longer than the town, longer than the roads, longer probably than anyone's memory of the place. The kind of forest that doesn't feel neutral. My grandmother's house sat on Pell Street, which was generous enough to call it a street. Gravel, technically. Frame house, 2 stories, white paint that had gone chalky and gray in places, a covered porch that sagged in the middle like a tired spine. Inside it smelled like her lavender and old wood, and something faintly medicinal that I could never identify but associated entirely with visiting as a child. The water heater was failing. 2 of the upstairs windows were sealed from the outside with weather stripping that had melted and rehardened into brown lumps. The kitchen faucet dripped at a specific rhythm, slow and irregular, like a second hand on a dying battery. I spent the first week cleaning. Just cleaning, moving boxes of her things, washing surfaces that hadn't been touched since February, opening windows to get the February death smell out of the rooms. Opening the windows felt important. like the first real maintenance thing I could do for a house that had been holding its breath. I didn't think anything of it. Bellow Fork is not a charming town. I want to be clear about that because sometimes people hear small Kentucky town and they picture something from a Hallmark movie bunting on storefronts, a diner with a pie case, a kind of slow authenticity that city people pay money to visit for a weekend. Bellow Fork is a Dollar General, a gas station with a single functioning pump, a feed store that also sold appliances and seemed confused about its own identity, and a diner called Patsy's that served 4 things: biscuits and gravy, a burger, catfish on Fridays, and coffee that tasted like it had never been introduced to the concept of being fresh. There was a Baptist church on the main road with a hand-painted sign out front that changed weekly. The week I arrived, it said, "God sees the dark, too." I assumed it was scripture. I didn't look it up. The houses on the main road were mostly older, a few mobile homes on the outskirts. A lot of the structures had that eastern Kentucky quality of looking like they were built by people who were certain, for 40 years, that something better was just around the corner, and then stopped being certain, and stopped finishing things. Half-painted porches, additions that didn't match the original house in any material or color, carports that were supporting kudzu now more than cars. But the people were fine, tired, self-sufficient, private in a way that isn't rude. It's just bounded. There are lines. You learn them without being told. You don't ask about other people's business. You don't push on a subject that's gone quiet. You accept coffee when it's offered, even bad coffee, because the offering is the point. My neighbor across the gravel road was a woman named Donna, 60-something, heavy-set, wore the same 3 flannels in rotation, had a dog named Pepper that hated everyone equally. She was the first person in Bellow Fork who spoke to me at any length, which happened because she walked over to introduce herself on day 2, and then stayed for 2 hours because that's just how Donna operates. She knew my grandmother, said she was a good woman, meant it in the way people mean it when they're not filling space. She asked how long I was staying. I said through summer, probably, maybe longer if the house needed a lot of work. She nodded like that was the right answer, helped me carry a box of old books from the porch to the car, patted the hood when she left. That was that. We had a coffee across the road relationship after that. Not close, but neighborly, functional. The first weird thing happened about a week in. I drove to the Dollar General. Tuesday afternoon. Still June. Hot and white sky, overcast, the way Kentucky gets in early summer. The air so thick with humidity, you feel like you're pushing through it. The parking lot was small. Maybe 12 spaces, half full. I pulled in, didn't really think about where I was parking, and ended up in a spot on the far side of the lot, nose in, facing the back of the property, which edged up against a wall of trees. It wasn't dramatic, just the tree line. Oaks and poplars, dense and green, starting maybe 15 feet past the curb. I went in, bought what I needed, came back out. A man I didn't know was standing near my car, maybe 50, ball cap, faded Carhartt shirt. Not leaning on it, just standing, looking at my car the way you'd look at a car parked in front of a fire hydrant, mildly concerned, like something was slightly incorrect. He saw me coming, nodded. "That your car?" "Yeah." "You might want to back into that one," he said, "or pull through if you can." He pointed at the spot on the other side of mine. The slot went all the way through, nose pointed back toward the road. "Oh," I said. Am I blocking something?" "No, nothing like that." He looked at the tree line behind my car, back at me. "Just easier to get out that way. Lot gets crowded later." It was 11 in the morning. The lot was half empty. "Okay," I said. I moved the car, backed out, pulled through, nose toward the road. He nodded once like something had been corrected, walked into the store. I sat there for a second after he left. The tree line behind where I'd been parked was completely ordinary. Dappled shade, birds, a plastic bag caught in a low branch doing its plastic bag thing in the humidity. I drove home and didn't think about it again for about 3 days. 3 days later, I was at the gas station, the one with one working pump, and I noticed it. Every single car in that lot was backed in or pulled through. Hood facing the road. Not one of them had its nose pointed toward the trees that ran along the east side of the property. I stood at the pump and looked at this and felt a specific kind of discomfort. Not fear. More like when you notice a word is spelled wrong on a sign and you can't stop seeing it. Something was slightly, consistently, deliberately wrong. I started watching. Patsy's Diner had a small gravel lot next to it, 6 or 8 spaces. Every car that pulled in, and I watched this through the window over 3 or 4 separate visits. Every car either backed in or swung wide to pull through so it faced the road. Even trucks, even people backing in awkwardly in 3 or 4 moves when there was plenty of room to just pull straight in. Nobody did it self-consciously. Nobody made a show of it. It was just how you parked, the way you hang your keys on the hook by the door without thinking. Muscle memory so old it stopped being memory and became reflex. The Baptist church had a gravel lot too, big enough for 20 cars. Sunday morning I drove by, slowly, didn't stop. I wasn't there for church, and every car was backed in or forward-facing toward the road. Not one of them pointed toward the tree line on the east side, including the pastor's truck. I asked Donna about it, tried to be casual. We were sitting on her porch with the terrible coffee, and she was telling me about the flooding issue on the far end of Raven Creek, and I just said almost like it was nothing, "Hey, I keep noticing everyone parks a certain way in town. Backed in, always facing away from the trees. Is that a thing here?" Donna took a sip of her coffee. Her dog raised its head from the porch boards and then put it back down. "Yeah," she said. Yeah. I waited. "Just what you do around here," she said. "Always have, far as I can remember." "Why?" She turned her mug in both hands, looked out toward the road. "Better to be pointed out. Ready to go." "Ready to go where?" She smiled at that. Not warmly, the smile you do when a question is technically unanswerable. "Anywhere," she said. "Just anywhere." She asked me if I'd talked to the estate lawyer about the property line dispute on the back lot, and we talked about that for the next 40 minutes, and I let the parking thing go, because that's the social grammar of places like Bellow Fork. When the subject changes, the subject is changed. The house took most of June. Cleaning, small repairs, the water heater, which cost $150 cash, I didn't really have. I'd been applying for nursing positions, Corbin, Barberville, one in Harlan that would have been a commute, and getting nothing back. Not rejections even, just silence, which is worse in its way. Silence means you don't exist enough to decline. The house was livable, paid for, property taxes cheap, in a way that made me briefly understand why people got stuck in places. Not trapped, stuck. There's a difference. Trapped implies something is holding you. Stuck is when you look down one day and realize the mud is at your knees, and you honestly can't remember when you stopped walking. There was a man in Bellow Fork that people talked about sideways. I didn't notice it at first because sideways talking is the primary mode of conversation in a lot of small towns, and you have to calibrate to it before you can read it. His name was Cecil Dabb. He lived in a house on the far end of Marker Road in what I gradually understood was a self-imposed arrangement that was separate from ordinary reclusion. He didn't just keep to himself. He stayed inside. As far as anyone in town seemed to know, he had not been outside his house in several years. Nobody said this directly. I pieced it together through a process that took weeks. At Patsy's, someone mentioned Cecil's sister does his grocery run. Said it the way you'd say, Cecil has a bad back. Neutral, practical, a condition you work around. At the hardware store, a woman mentioned that Cecil used to do things drive, fish at Raven Creek, show up at church, and used to with a finality that meant there was a specific demarcation between the used to and the now. Not gradual, not age. When I asked Donna about him once, she said, Cecil had a hard time a few years back, and folded her hands in a way that said, we're done with this topic. He had a hard time. It was July before I understood what specifically Cecil had done to have a hard time, and I only understood it because of a conversation I had with a teenage boy named Trace, who worked at the feed store part-time and who did not yet have the reflex for leaving sentences unfinished. I was buying bird feed. My grandmother had a feeder, and I felt obscurely obligated to maintain it, and Trace was ringing me up, and we were talking about nothing, the way you do with teenagers who are bored and someone is there to talk to. He mentioned something about Linden Road. Linden Road was one of the county roads that cut northeast out of town, parallel to the main forest edge, and then curved into the trees and kept going toward the ridge. Nobody in town seemed to use it. I'd driven it once out of curiosity and found nothing, just trees and the road, and a padlocked gate on a gravel spur about 2 miles in that said, "Private, no trespassing." Trace mentioned that Linden Road wasn't a good road to be on after dark. "Why?" I said. He shrugged with that teenage combination of wanting to seem like he knew things and knowing he was probably saying something he'd been told not to. Cecil Dabb went up Linden Road at night a few years ago, parked up there in his truck. And he was there for a long time, and his sister went and got him. What happened to him? Trace was quiet for a second, counted my change too carefully, which was a tell. "He looked at the wrong thing," he said. I didn't push. He seemed suddenly very aware he'd said it. I could see him regretting it. So I took my change and my birdseed and said thank you and went to my car, reversed in to park, nose facing the road. I'd been doing it automatically for about 3 weeks at that point. Hadn't noticed until right then. The sound I started hearing was different from anything I could explain with the house settling or the creek. It came from the northeast, from the direction of the ridge, from the forest side. Not every night, not even most nights. Maybe twice a week, usually after midnight. It was low, but not a mechanical low. Not a motor or a transformer, more like a tone. The way a bowl sings if you run a wet finger around the rim. A sustained resonance that seemed to come from everywhere at once because it was coming from the ground as much as the air. And it put my teeth on edge in a specific way I associated with exhaustion. That whole-body hypersensitivity you get after a 36-hour shift when everything's too loud and too bright. and your skin feels 3 degrees too sensitive. I'd lie in bed and listen to it and tell myself. Natural harmonic resonance. The valley shape, the creek, geological formations, amplifying ambient noise. I'd told patients things like that, worried people. Here's the explanation. Here's why the thing isn't what you think it is. Practical, calm, the nurse voice. I used the nurse voice on myself. Then I'd fall asleep and wake up with my jaw clenched and not remember my dreams, which felt like a relevant piece of information that I was actively choosing not to pursue. The diner Patsy's had a layout that didn't make structural sense when you thought about it. The front of the building faced the main road, windows facing the road. Normal. The east wall, the one that would have faced the tree line, maybe 60 yards of grass and a ditch, and then forest. He had no windows at all, just painted cinder block. A clock, a specials board, a community bulletin board, everything it could possibly have, except glass. I asked Patsy once. She shrugged. Wasn't built with any. Changed the subject to a road closure on 25E before I could push. Whoever built the diner had made a deliberate decision about the east side, made it before Patsy owned it, before most of the town was alive, probably. The decision had been made so long ago that the reason was gone, and all that was left was the wall. A wall with no windows, facing the trees. 4th of July. Bellow Fork had what they called a celebration. The fire department put a few picnic tables in the parking lot behind the Dollar General, and someone donated a charcoal grill, potato salad and hot dogs and a case of Ale-8, and kids running around in the humidity. It was fine, warm and unremarkable, and almost normal. At dusk, the families started packing up, not because it was late, it was 8:30. Still light. But the families with kids went first, unhurried and cheerful, just wrapping up. I stayed a while, talking to Donna and a man named Porter, who worked county maintenance. When it got dark, real dark, stars coming out, I realized I was one of about 5 people still there. The fire department guys were still around. They were always around at night. I'd noticed their lights on past midnight most of the time I was up. Porter was still there, but he was wrapping up. He looked at the tree line. The forest was close on the south side of the lot, maybe 40 yards, and then looked at his phone. Well, he said, to nobody specifically. Better call it? Everybody agreed in that quiet, simultaneous way. No argument. No one more drink. Just a comfortable collective acknowledgement that some line had been approached and it was time to step back from it. Donna walked me to my car. My car was backed in correctly. I'd done it automatically. She looked at it and then she patted my arm. Just a brief touch. The back of her hand on my forearm like I'd done something she was glad about. Not effusive, just registering it. I thought about that for a long time after I got home. Late July was when I found the logbook. My grandmother had kept records of things her whole life. Not journals exactly, she wasn't sentimental about writing. More practical. Household logs, lists, maintenance records, expenses. I found it in the desk in her small back room, underneath a hardware store catalog from 2011 and a folder of property tax receipts. Composition notebook, black cover, worn at the corners. Most of it was exactly what I expected, what she planted in the garden, repair dates for the roof, the names of the people she'd loaned small amounts of money to and whether they'd paid it back. But at the back, in the last 20 or so pages, the entries changed. Less about the house, more like observations. Short, factual, written in her careful, cramped hand. June 14th, tone again after midnight. Stayed in. Pepper refused to go out after 9. She didn't own a dog named Pepper. That was Donna's dog. But she'd had a dog, I remembered, a dog from childhood visits. Same name, apparently. August 3rd. Becca, from the end of Pell, parked facing east at the gas station. Didn't know better. I let her know afterward. She was new. November 12th. The Reaver boy left a window open. Nothing happened, but he had a bad night from the feel of it. Not always the windows, though. January 9th. Long tone. 4 hours. Checked the perimeter of the property from inside. No movement at the back tree line. March 1st. I think the Dalton house got a dog specifically for the hearing. They're not the first. And then near the very back, an entry that wasn't dated, written in pen that had gone dry partway through, so it was half engraved rather than written. The rule about the cars isn't really about seeing it coming. It's about knowing which way to go when you do. I sat with that for a long time, knowing which way to go when you do. Not if, when. My grandmother had lived in this house her whole adult life. She'd kept records. She'd noted windows and tones and parking directions and dogs trained to listen for something. She'd adapted completely, practically, without drama or mythology, the way she adapted to everything. The way she'd adapted to my grandfather dying, to the mine closing, to the specific grinding poverty of being old in eastern Kentucky. You note it, you account for it, you adjust, you don't leave, you just build your life around the shape of it. I closed the notebook, put it back under the catalog, then I went through the house methodically, the way I did with patients' rooms, and checked every window on the east side. 2 of them had secondary latches my grandmother had installed herself, hand-drilled, a little crooked, the same mismatched screws you'd use if you did it yourself instead of calling someone. The 3rd window, on the east wall of the kitchen, had been sealed, not just weather-stripped, sealed from the outside with weather stripping and caulk and something else I couldn't tell what in the dark, that had hardened into a continuous seam around the entire frame. That window hadn't been openable in years. I'd opened the kitchen window the 2nd day I was there, one of the west-facing ones, thank God, toward the road. I never thought to check this one because it was just there. A window in a kitchen. Why would you think about it? My grandmother had sealed it herself, years ago, carefully and completely, from the outside. I stood in the kitchen for a while after that. The tone was very faint that night, barely there, more felt than heard. I made tea, turned on the kitchen radio, the old one she'd had there for decades, FM country that cut in and out, sometimes a preacher at night, sometimes static. I turned it low but left it on, not for company, for noise, to fill the space that the tone was trying to occupy. That was the first night I understood that I wasn't just staying in my grandmother's house. I was maintaining it. The evening after I found the logbook, I drove to the Dollar General for nothing in particular. Something to do, somewhere to be that wasn't the house, and that notebook and the sealed kitchen window. Fog had come in off the creek the way it does in late July in a Kentucky hollow, low and thick, sitting about waist height in the fields, turning the tree line at the edge of the lot into something gray and uncertain. I pulled in and backed into my spot without thinking about it. Habit. There were 3 other cars in the lot, all of them facing east. Nose in, hoods pointing toward the tree line. The wrong way, all 3 of them. I sat in my car and looked at this for a moment. Thought, someone new, someone who doesn't know. Probably more than one, someone tourists maybe passing through. I got out, walked past the 3 cars on my way to the entrance. They were empty, not just unoccupied, empty the way a car is empty when nobody has been in it for a while. No coffee cups on the dash, no bags on the seats, no sense of recent presence. Just 3 cars, wrong-facing, sitting in the thickening fog with their hoods aimed at the trees. I went inside. The girl at the register, 18 maybe, reading her phone, didn't look up right away. "Hey," I said. "The 3 cars out front, you know whose they are?" She glanced toward the window. Just a flicker, then back to me. "Came in this morning," she said. "Haven't moved. All day. All day. I bought coffee I didn't need and went back out." Porter's county maintenance truck pulled in while I was loading my car. He backed in correctly, automatically, the way everyone did. Got out. Walked past the 3 wrong-facing cars without slowing. I said, "Those yours?" He stopped. Looked at the 3 cars. A long, flat look. "Nope." "You know whose they are?" He looked at the tree line past them, at the fog sitting heavy at the forest edge, at the gap between the trees where the darkness pooled and deepened. Then he looked at me. "Nope," he said again. Went inside. I drove home, reversed into my driveway. Checked the east windows, both latches, both fine. The next morning the 3 cars were gone. I didn't ask about them. I didn't want to know if the answer was that nobody had moved them. August. The heat at its worst. 90-something degrees, with the kind of humidity that makes the air into a physical thing. I was sleeping badly. The heat, partly. But also, I'd started checking things at night without meaning to. Not compulsively, not in a diagnosable way. Just, when I woke at 2 or 3, I'd drift toward the east-facing windows and look at the latches, both of them. Stand in the dark, squinting at screws I could barely see, feeling for the little resistance that meant the latch was secure. Once I found one had come loose, just vibration, probably, the way hardware does. And I stood there with my heart going in a specific register while I hand-tightened it. I didn't have a screwdriver on me. The next day, I bought one. Small one, fits in a jeans pocket. I told myself I was just being practical. Old house, old hardware, regular maintenance. I didn't look at the screwdriver and think about the previous version of me, the one in Louisville. The one who left windows open in summer because that's a normal human thing to do, and feel anything in particular. I looked at it and thought, okay, good, got it. The night in August, I've been circling it since I started telling you any of this. I knew I had to get to it. I knew when I sat down to talk about Bellow Fork that this was the part I was going to have to say out loud. It was a Wednesday, late August. I know it was a Wednesday because I'd been at the Dollar General. They restocked the coffee I liked on Wednesdays, which I knew because I'd asked. Because you notice things like that when your life is small and routined. It was almost 10, not late by normal standards. I pulled into the gas station on the way back because I needed to fill up, and I was thinking about the coffee I'd just bought and whether the nursing job in Barberville was worth applying for again, or if I should try Lexington, and whether Lexington meant I was giving up on something I wasn't sure what. I pulled in and parked. Nose in. right side of the lot, hood facing east, facing the tree line. I didn't realize I was in my head. I got out, swiped my card at the pump, started filling, and I was looking at my phone when I noticed that the tree line was directly in front of my car. Right there. The headlights, still on, because I hadn't been paying attention, were pointing straight at the forest edge. About 60 feet of gas station lot, and then pavement edge, and then grass, and then the beginning of the trees. I told myself, turn the headlights off, get in the car, finish filling up. Don't park like this. But I didn't move right away, because something about the tree line was wrong. I should be specific about this because I've thought about it a lot since, and I want to be accurate. The tree line was not doing anything. The trees were not moving. Nothing was coming out of them. But there was a section, maybe 20, 30 feet wide, where the dark between the trees was wrong. This is Kentucky in August. Bugs everywhere, fireflies usually doing their thing in the lower grass, tree frogs going, the whole nighttime just loud and alive the way summer nights in the South are loud and alive. Except in that section, no fireflies, no sound. The bugs were going everywhere else. I could hear them on both sides, the whole nighttime choir, but that section of tree line was just nothing. An absence of the alive sounds that surrounded it on both sides. And the darkness in that gap was... I want to be careful here because this is where it's easy to oversay it. The darkness in that gap was more present than the darkness around it. That's the best way I have to describe it. Like the difference between a room with the lights off and a room that's been painted black. Both are dark. One of them is just dark. The other is dark in a way you feel against your face. I stood at the pump, holding the nozzle, and I looked at it. My headlights were pointed right at it. 2 beams of light, pointed east, hitting the forest edge. And whatever was wrong in that section of tree line, that dense, present, alive-feeling dark, was just inside the first layer of trees, just past where the headlights reached. Standing in the exact place where light ends. It wasn't moving. I had the overwhelming conviction that it was watching me look at it. Not the way you feel watched by a person, not the way you feel watched by an animal. Something closer to the way you feel when you're reading something that changes the way you think about everything you've read before, this spreading sense of reorientation, of becoming aware of a context that was always there, and you just didn't have the framework for it. I kept looking. That's the part I can't explain and can't forgive myself for. In a way, I kept looking. Not because I wanted to. I'm not going to pretend this was some act of bravery or curiosity. I kept looking because in the same way you can't look away from a car accident, even though every reasonable part of you wants to, I could not get my eyes to move. The dark in the gap between the trees shifted, not moved, shifted. Like the depth of it changed, like it was closer. I think I heard the tone, not thought I heard. Clear and low and close, like someone had pressed a tuning fork against the back of my skull. My ears pressurized. I was in my driveway. That's the next thing I have, clearly. I was in my driveway, engine off, hands on the steering wheel. My car was backed in, reversed all the way into the gravel driveway, nose pointing toward the road, perfectly parked. I had a full tank of gas. The receipt was in the cup holder. It was time-stamped 10:04 p.m. My phone said 10:31. I had no memory of the gas station between the pump and my driveway. 27 minutes. I sat in the car for a while. My hands were steady. That was the strange part. Everything in my body felt completely calm, not the calm of relief, Not the calm of something resolved, but the calm of something settled. Like a question had been answered in a language I didn't have words for, but my nervous system understood perfectly. I went inside, locked both doors, checked the east-facing windows, both latches, both fine. Put my screwdriver on the kitchen counter. Made tea. Sat at the kitchen table until midnight, listening to the radio. Nothing happened that night. No tone. No presence at the tree line. The tree frogs went about their business. I went to bed, and I slept better than I had since I'd arrived. Which is the part that sits with me most, honestly. Donna was on her porch when I got up the next morning, earlier than usual. She had a mug of coffee, and she was looking at the road with the specific stillness of someone who has been sitting there for a while. When I came outside, she looked over, looked at my face, didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Come have coffee." She poured me a mug without asking what I wanted in it. She'd been adding milk for weeks, and she knew by now I drank it black. We sat on the porch for a while. Pepper came over and put his chin on my knee, which he'd never done before. I scratched behind his ears. "You were at the station late last night," Donna said. Not a question. "Yeah." "Took you a while to get home." I turned my mug. "I don't really remember driving home." Donna nodded. The same way you'd nod at a weather report you'd been expecting. "You'll sleep well for a bit," she said. "They usually do. After." I didn't ask who they were. I understood they were people who'd accidentally looked at the wrong thing at the wrong time. People who'd parked facing east and stood there with their headlights pointed into the trees like an invitation. "It doesn't hurt you," Donna said. "It's not like—" She stopped, tried again. "Nobody who looked got hurt, physically. But Cecil Dabb," she wrapped her hands around her mug. "Cecil looked for a long time. He was there most of a night." "What happened to him?" "He understood too much of it," she said. "You get a small dose of understanding something that your brain wasn't built to understand. You sleep well for a while, and then it fades and you're mostly fine. You get too much." She shook her head. "He understood too much, and now he can't understand anything else. He sits there. He's not unhappy. His sister says he seems peaceful. But he doesn't go outside, because he doesn't care about what's outside anymore. There's nothing outside that matters to him the way—" She stopped again. "The way whatever's in there matters," I said. "Yeah." I thought about the parking, about all the cars, every car, backed in, nose to the road, ready to go. Not because something was going to chase you. Because if you were pointed at it, if you were facing it, you might stop being able to look away. And if you stopped being able to look away long enough, the understanding came. And the understanding was too big for you. And you'd spend the rest of your life sitting peacefully in a house completely full of something you couldn't share and couldn't put down and couldn't get distance from because it was inside you now. Ready to go meant, don't park so you can see it easily. Don't give yourself a straight line to look from. Keep the road between you and the tree line. Keep your headlights on the escape route. Not because you're scared of it, because you're scared of what it is, of what you'll become if you understand it. My grandmother knew, I said. Your grandmother, Donna said, was the steadiest woman I ever met. She had a long look at it when she was young, before she knew better. But she only got a short one, and she... Donna smiled a little. She said afterward she felt it settle in like a low-grade fever. Said after a week she couldn't feel it anymore. But she knew what it was after that. and she wasn't afraid of it. She just respected it, like you respect the current in a river you swim in. I asked Donna then what she thought it was. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought she wasn't going to answer. "I think it's been here longer than we have," she said finally. "And I think it's patient. And I think it looks at us the way we look at, I don't know, moss, weather, something that's just there, that just is. And it doesn't need anything from us except to have us not look at it too long, because when we do, when one of us looks at it too long, we get stuck to it somehow, like a fly to paper. And I think it doesn't want that. I think it doesn't like having a human being stuck to it any more than we like it. But it can't help it, any more than the river can help pulling you under if you swim in the wrong place." The morning was already hot, humid. The kudzu on the utility pole across the road was doing its daily aggressive growth, or seeming to. "You probably got just enough," Donna said. "Same as your grandmother, just enough to know." I thought about the 27 minutes, the calm, the screwdriver on the kitchen counter. "And now, I'll just..." "No," she said, "and not look again." It's October now. The heat broke in September. The deciduous trees are starting to turn red and yellow, and that brown-orange of old brick, the whole forest edge becoming something that would be beautiful if I looked at it directly, which for obvious reasons I have some complicated feelings about now. I got a position, not Louisville, not Barberville, a clinic in town. I didn't even know Bellow Fork had a clinic, but it's there on the main road. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 1 doctor and 2 nurses and a waiting room with 3 chairs. The pay is not good, but it's something, and my grandmother's house is paid for. I've stopped thinking about selling it. I've started thinking about the windows on the east wall that she sealed, about whether the caulk on the kitchen window is still holding, about whether I should add a secondary latch to the bathroom window upstairs, which faces northeast, and which I never open anyway, but which has a standard lock that doesn't feel like quite enough on certain nights. I bought a better screwdriver, one of the ones with the magnetic tip, so small parts don't fall. Last week, a woman from Corbin came through, passing through, just needed gas. Her daughter was with her, maybe 16, 17, and she pulled into the gas station nose in, facing the tree line. I was across the lot, filling up my own car, backed in correctly, nose towards the road. I walked over. The woman saw me coming and looked a little wary. A stranger walking toward her at a gas station is a stranger walking toward her at a gas station. "Hey," I said. "I know this sounds strange, but you want to back out and pull in the other way, or pull through if you can." She looked at me. Same expression I probably had, same mix of mild suspicion and confusion. "Is there a problem?" "No, no problem. It's easier to get out this way. Trust me." Her daughter in the passenger seat was looking at her phone. The woman looked at the tree line behind her car. Back at me, trying to read me. "Okay," she said. "Sure." She moved the car, got her gas. They drove on without speaking to me again. I stood at the pump and watched their taillights disappear around the bend in the road, and I felt something I've been turning over since. Not pride, not relief, more like completion, like a loop closing, my grandmother sealing the kitchen window, and now me, in a gas station lot on a cool October evening, walking up to a stranger's car and saying these words in this order with this voice. The practiced flat calm, the non-explanation, the trust me, the whole thing passing from person to person, generation to generation, Like the town itself is making sure its maintenance gets done. Like it's not just the Holler taking care of its own, it's the own taking care of the Holler. I reverse park now everywhere I go. I locked the east windows last week, even though we're still weeks from first frost, because the tone has been consistent for 3 nights running, and on the second night it was louder than I'd heard it. I make sure, when I'm standing in the backyard in the early morning, that I'm turned sideways, not facing it, not facing away. Sideways, enough peripheral awareness that you could move fast if something changed, not enough direct eye contact to start understanding things you can't afford to understand. My grandmother taught me that without ever meaning to. Through a sealed window and a composition notebook and a dead dog named Pepper, that her neighbor later named a living dog after. Because that's how Bellow Fork teaches you. Not in words, in leftovers, in what's already there when you arrive. The window that won't open, the wall in the diner with no glass in it, the cars all facing the road, the Holler takes care of its own. And eventually, if you stay long enough, if you sleep in the right house, if you look just enough, and not too much, you become the way it takes care. You become the system. You stand in a gas station lot on a Tuesday evening, and you tell a woman from Corbin to move her car, and you say it in a voice that sounds like no big deal, like weather advice, like something a reasonable person says, and you mean every word of it in a way she'll never understand. And you walk back to your car, backed in, nose to the road, ready to go, and you get in, and you don't look east. Anyway, if you stop somewhere unfamiliar tonight, some lot you don't know, trees close, late, tired, just pay attention to which direction you're facing. It probably doesn't matter. Most places, it doesn't matter at all. The woman from Corbin drove east after that, toward the ridge. I think about her sometimes when the tone comes in, and I'm lying there in the dark with my jaw already clenched. I hope she got home okay. I hope she's sleeping fine.